John Maxwell writes, "Leadership ability is the lid that determines a person's level of effectiveness." He also says, the higher you want to climb, the more you need leadership. Now, this is classic Maxwell. Simple, memorable, and honest. Pretty true. His point is that your leadership capacity places a ceiling on your impact. You might be hardworking. You're probably smart. You may be tactically sharp. You may know policy cold. But if you don't grow as a leader, eventually you become the bottleneck. And I've seen that play out in policing. I've seen supervisors who were technically strong, but relationally weak. I've seen leaders who were very good at tasks and very poor at developing people. I've seen leaders who could solve operational problems all day long. But the moment the issue requires influence, coaching, empathy, buy-in, or even long-term growth, they hit the ceiling. That is the lid.
This is Blue Leader Nation. Blue Leader Nation. We're here to develop those men and women in law enforcement who want to be respected leaders and to mold you into becoming a legendary leader. If it's leadership, personal growth, and self-development, we're talking about it. Whether you're new or a veteran, you've found your new home. This is the Blue Leader Nation. Now, here's your host, Dr. Ed Pallas.
Hello and welcome back to the Blue Leader Nation podcast, real talk for the next generation of law enforcement leaders. Before we jump in, I want you to know that I put together a recommended reading list for leaders. And yes, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is on that list for a reason. It was one of the first leadership books I ever read, and it's still one that I recommend today. If you want that reading list, it's in the show notes. I should also give you a fair disclosure right now. I am one of John Maxwell's certified coaches. So yeah, I'm going to be a little biased here, but I'm still going to give you an honest take because respect does not require blind agreement, and leadership books still have to survive contact with real life. Today, I want to talk about one of the classics, like I said, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. Now look, this isn't going to be a chapter-by-chapter book report. Nobody needs that. This is going to be a field translation because what sounds clean on the page can get messy in a police department, sheriff's department, communications center, public safety agency, or any workplace where stress, culture, egos, politics, and human nature are always in the room. And that's one reason this book has lasted so long. John tries to make leadership concrete and teachable, and he does a really good job. He argues that the laws can be learned, that they can stand alone, and that each one carries consequences. He also keeps returning to a few central ideas. Leadership is learnable. Influence matters more than title. Growth is a process. Trust matters. And legacy matters. This is where I think the book is the strongest. Now, here's my caveat. Leadership books can make things sound a little too tidy and a little too universal, a little too simple. And I think if you're watching or listening to this in public safety, you know leadership is not just about vision and inspiration. It's about credibility. It's about consistency. It's about how you handle conflict, stress, discipline, change, and people who are quietly deciding whether you're the real deal. So I want to respect John Maxwell, but I also want to translate John Maxwell. Today, I want to focus on 5 of the 21 laws. 5 laws that matter, especially for law enforcement leaders and civilian public safety leaders. We're going to talk about the law of the lid, the law of influence, the law of connection, the law of the inner circle, and the law of legacy. Let's start with the first one. Law number 1, the law of the lid. John Maxwell writes, "Leadership ability is the lid that determines a person's level of effectiveness." He also says, "The higher you want to climb, the more you need leadership." Now, this is classic Maxwell. Simple, memorable, and honest. Pretty true. His point is that your leadership capacity places a ceiling on your impact. You might be hardworking. You're probably smart. You may be tactically sharp. You may know policy cold. But if you don't grow as a leader, eventually you become the bottleneck. And I've seen that play out in policing. I've seen supervisors who were technically strong, but relationally weak. I've seen leaders who were very good at task and very poor at developing people. I've seen leaders who could solve operational problems all day long. But the moment the issue requires influence, coaching, empathy, buy-in, or even long-term growth, they hit the ceiling. That is the lid. Sometimes leaders think the organization is holding them back. And sometimes that is true. We all know systems can get broken. Staffing can be thin. Bureaucracy can be maddening. And politics can be exhausting. Sometimes the issue is the leader's current capacity. Now, that is not an insult. That is a growth opportunity. One of the things I believe very strongly is that leadership growth has to be intentional. It doesn't happen because you got promoted. It does not happen because you get older. Trust me on that one. It does not happen because you have a title and a seat at the table. It happens because you decide to grow. I'll tell you this about myself. I'm a leadership nerd. I really am. I set aside time every day to read, journal, and reflect on how I can improve, especially as a leader and as a teacher. Not because I think I have arrived, quite the opposite. I do it because I know the minute I stop learning, I start lowering my lid. And if I lower my lid, eventually I lower what I can give to people. That is true for sergeants, for lieutenants, captains, majors, chiefs, directors, and civilian managers. Now, to be fair, the law of the lid can be oversimplified. Not every problem in an organization is caused by weak leadership. Sometimes the system is the problem. Sometimes resources are the problem. And sometimes culture is deeply ingrained and resistant. But even then, leadership still affects how well people respond to these realities. So I still think Maxwell is onto something here. If your team is stuck, one question worth asking is this: is the system the lid, or am I the lid? Now, that's not a comfortable question. But then again, leadership is not a comfortable sport. Leadership growth is a process. Leaders are learners. Improvement comes through daily effort, not one inspirational moment. That fits the law of the lid perfectly, because your lid rises through a process, not wishful thinking, not promotion, through intentional process. So here's the first coaching question for you. Where might your current leadership capacity be limiting your team? Not someday, right now. And once you ask that question, I think the next one becomes obvious. How do you know whether you are really leading? So think about that question. Seriously, give it some thought, because it takes us to the second law. Law number 2, the law of influence. Now, Maxwell writes, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And he adds, if you can't influence others, they won't follow you. That may be the most important sentence in the whole book. Leadership is influence, not title, not rank, not tenure, not personality, not seniority, influence. And this is where I think Maxwell absolutely nails it. I've seen too many supervisors rely on the stripes on their sleeves or the bars on their shoulders for influence. They miss the fact that influence is built on relationships. Rank can get compliance, sure, but influence gets commitment. Rank can assign a task, but influence shapes culture. Rank can make somebody show up. Influence is what makes them lean in. And if you've been policing for any length of time, you know exactly what I mean. You've seen people in formal positions who had very little real influence. And you've also seen people without any real formal authority who could shape the room the moment they spoke. The real leader in the room is often not the person running the meeting. It's the person people watch before deciding how seriously to take what was just said. That is influence. And public safety leaders ignore that reality at your own risk. All right, Maxwell pushes back on several myths about leadership. He challenges the idea that management automatically equals leadership, or that knowledge automatically equals leadership, or that position automatically equals leadership. He notes that a title may buy you a little time, but not much more than that. That matters in our profession because policing is still heavily rank conscious. We have insignias, we have structure, we have order, and we have a chain of command. And those things do matter. Formal authority matters in law enforcement. But human followership is still voluntary at the emotional level. People decide every day how much of themselves they're willing to give to your leadership. Do they trust your motives? Do they believe you are fair? Do they think you're competent? Do they believe you're going to back them when it really counts? Do they think you care enough to know what is happening in their world? Do they respect your judgment? This is where influence lives. Now, here's where I want to add my own layer. I don't think influence should be confused with charisma. Some very charismatic people are actually weak leaders. Durable influence is quieter than that. It's built on fairness, it's built on competence, and it's built on consistency. It's built on how you handle people when the conversation is uncomfortable. It's built on what people experience from you over time. And in policing, people are constantly reading the leader. They're watching you. They're watching how you respond under pressure, how you handle criticism, how you talk about people who aren't even in the room, whether you play favorites and whether you admit mistakes, whether you tell the truth, whether your standards shift on who's standing in front of you. That's the real test. So here's the question. Who really has influence in your unit right now? And why? And here's the harder version. Are people following you because they have to or because they want to? Law number 10, the law of connection. Maxwell writes, leaders touch a heart before they ask for a hand. He also says, you can't move people to action unless you first move them with emotion. Wow. Now, for some leaders, especially in public safety, those phrases might feel a little soft, but stay with me, because I think this law matters a lot. Connection does not mean softness. It doesn't mean favoritism. It doesn't mean becoming everybody's buddy. It does not mean surrendering standards. It means your people believe you see them. It means they believe you know them as human beings, not just assignment holders or badge numbers or names on a schedule. It means they believe you care enough to understand what matters to them. And that matters more than most leaders want to admit. Because people will tolerate a lot from a leader when they believe that leader actually cares. Correction lands differently when connection exists. Feedback lands differently when connection exists. Change lands differently when connection exists. And even discipline is received differently when the person on the receiving end believes the leader is fair, human, and grounded in genuine concern rather than ego or irritation. In law enforcement, connection matters before the crisis, not just during it. If the only time your people hear from you is when something went wrong, your leadership can start to feel like surveillance instead of support. And that is a fast way to weaken trust. This is especially important when people move from peer to supervisor, when they go from buddy to boss. A lot of leaders struggle there. They think they have only two choices. One is to become overly familiar and avoid hard conversations because they don't want to damage old relationships. The other is to become oddly distant and stiff, like leadership now requires a personality transplant. But neither extreme works very well. Your people do not need you to be their best friend. They need to know you are there for them, even when you have to challenge them. That is connection with standards. That is connection with boundaries. And that is connection without favoritism. And that is what strong leaders learn to build. Leaders need to connect personally with individuals, learn what team members care about, figure out and understand their strengths and weaknesses, and spend more time with their people rather than floating above them. That's not weak leadership. That's relational credibility. And I think this is where Maxwell is stronger than some people give him credit for. He understands that people do not just buy into logic. They buy into you, the leader. They buy into the relationship. They buy into whether they feel understood. Now here's the caution. Connection can be misunderstood. If leaders hear connect and think it means to be liked, they can get themselves into trouble. Being liked, likership, is not the mission. Building trust is the mission. So if I were translating Maxwell for our profession, I would say this. Connection is not about being popular. It's about being known, trusted, and human enough that people are willing to follow. So ask yourself this. How well do your people actually know you? And how well do you know them? Because once you begin to build real connection, another issue comes into focus very quickly. And that is, you cannot carry leadership by yourself. That is where the 11th law comes in. Law number 11, the law of the inner circle. Maxwell writes this: A leader's potential is determined by those closest to him. And he adds, there are no Lone Ranger leaders. But a lot of police organizations still operate as if the strong solo performer is the model. The supervisor who keeps everything in his head. The commander who solves every problem personally. The leader who is always busy, always overloaded, always indispensable, and somehow proud of this fact. That's not leadership. That's not scalable leadership. That's leadership with no bench. Your leadership potential is shaped by the people around you. If the people closest to you are weak, cynical, insecure, territorial, stagnant, or afraid to tell you the truth, your leadership will shrink around that reality. If the people around you are growing, honest, capable, and aligned with the standards, and they are willing to think, to challenge, and to develop others, your leadership multiplies. This is one area I am so passionate about. I care a lot. I have always tried to empower my direct reports by finding out what their career goals are and then trying to help them get there. I think that type of coaching, mentoring, it's lacking in American policing today. Too many supervisors spend most of their energy evaluating people and not enough time and energy developing them. They talk about standards, but they don't build people. They're too busy correcting mistakes. But they don't coach on growth. They focus on immediate performance, but ignore long-term potential. And then we act surprised when the next generation is underprepared. If we want stronger sergeants, stronger lieutenants, commanders, civilian managers, stronger future chiefs and directors and sheriffs, then you have to develop them before that vacancy comes open. You have to ask people what they want next. You have to help them prepare before the opportunity appears. You have to stop hoarding knowledge and start creating capacity in others. That is how leadership multiplies. Developing leaders in an organization is one of the most effective ways to create long-term growth. And many strong leaders emerge because another leader mentored them. That certainly rings true to me. When I look back across my career and the people I have seen grow the most, very few of them, including myself, grew in isolation. Most were developed because somebody took an interest in them, gave them honest feedback, challenged them, encouraged them, and helped them think bigger than the job. That's leadership development. Now, one caution here. The phrase inner circle can sound unhealthy in law enforcement if people hear it or see it as favoritism, as clique building, or as a protected little club of loyalists. That's not a healthy form of leadership. A healthy inner circle is not built on personal loyalty to the boss. It's built on character, competence, trust, and shared standards. It should be a circle of people who make the organization stronger, not a circle of people who make the leader feel safer. That's an important distinction. Because if your inner circle can't challenge you, you don't really have an inner circle. You have an echo chamber. And echo chambers are very dangerous in leadership. So here's the question. Who are you intentionally developing right now? Did a name pop into your head? Did a face or two pop into your head? If not, you've got some homework. Remember, I didn't ask the question, who are you supervising? I didn't ask the question, who are you evaluating? But who are you actively developing? Because if the answer is nobody, then part of your leadership legacy is already being written and not in the way you want. This brings us to the final law in the book. And I know I've skipped a bunch, but I told you at the beginning, I wouldn't be covering all 21. This would be a 4-hour-long podcast. 21, the law of legacy. Maxwell asked, what do you want people to say at your funeral? He also writes, if you want your leadership to really have meaning, you need to take into account the law of legacy. This is where this book gets more reflective. And honestly, I think it's one of Maxwell's strongest sections, maybe the strongest section. Actually, his first, Law of the Lid, and this one, man, if you read nothing else, just read the law number 1 and law number 21. Hear me. Legacy is not your title. It's not your office. It's not the plaque they hand you at retirement. It's not your challenge coin connection. It's not your name on the side of a building. Your legacy is what remains stronger because you were there. Did you leave people better prepared? Did you leave the culture healthier? Did you create stronger leaders behind you? Did you leave more trust or more damage? Did you build something that outlasts your personality? That is legacy. And in public safety, leaders inherit culture, but they also leave it behind for someone else. The next generation has to live inside whatever you built, whatever you ignored, whatever you tolerated, or whatever you modeled. That should sober us all up a little, because leadership is never just about what you get through. It's about what you leave behind. How will your life in leadership be ultimately remembered? That's worth reflecting on. When your people talk about your leadership years from now, what will they say? Will they say you had high standards and low ego? Or will they say you developed people? Will they say you made the place healthier? Will they say you were fair? Will they say you made hard decisions with integrity? Will they agree that you prepared others to lead? Will they say you left them stronger? Or will they say you held a chair, protected your turf, and made everything about you? Legacy has a way of revealing what leadership really is. Now, here's the caution. I would add to Maxwell, legacy can become ego bait for leaders if they treat it like a monument project. Better question is not, will they remember me? The better question is, will they benefit from how I led? That's a healthier standard. Not memory for its own sake, benefit for others. So ask yourself this: when you leave your current role, what will be stronger because you were there? That's the question pulling these 5 laws that I highlighted together. Now, let me pull these all together because they really do build on each other. The law of the lid says your leadership capacity sets the ceiling. The law of influence reminds you that title is not enough. The law of connection says people follow leaders who care enough to know them. The law of the inner circle says leadership multiplies through people. And finally, the law of legacy says all of it should outlast your position. Put these 5 laws together and you've got something pretty powerful. If you raise your lid, if you build real influence, connect with your people, develop those around you, and lead with legacy in mind, then you're doing more than holding a rank. You're actually leading. And none of this happens by accident. This is why I think this book matters. Not because every law is perfect, not because every example translates cleanly into policing, not because Maxwell has solved leadership for once and for all, but because he gives us language and concepts that still force the right questions. And in leadership, asking the right questions is half the battle. So let me leave you with 5 practical takeaways. First, where is your current leadership capacity helping your team, and where is it limiting them? Second, where have you been borrowing authority instead of earning influence? Third, who in your team do you need to reconnect with? Not to inspect them, but to better understand them. And fourth, who are you intentionally developing right now? Last, fifth, what kind of legacy are you building? Whether you mean it or not, you're building a legacy. Pick one of these, just one, and work on it this week. That's how you grow as a leader. Leadership is not a rank. It is a set of skills. And like any skills, they can be taught, learned, and developed. If this episode challenged you, and if you want help raising your lid, grab that recommended reading list from the show notes. The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is on that list, along with other books that have shaped the way I think, the way I lead and teach. This list includes Maxwell, and I encourage you to read his entire book. But in addition to Maxwell, I have Simon Sinek on there, Bob Sutton, the Arbinger Institute, Michael Abershoft, Brene Brown, Jocko Willink, and of course I had to throw my own book, Leader Armor, in there. Read some of those books. Leaders need to be learners. I've spent years being a bit of a leadership nerd, reading, journaling, reflecting, and trying to improve myself as a leader and as a teacher. And I can tell you this with confidence. If you want to raise your organization, you have to raise your own lid first. Hey, real quick before you go, I got to give you a news update. At a local restaurant, a man and a woman who didn't know each other got into an argument. The man ended up throwing his Jell-O at the woman. Police were called, and the man was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. Finally, one other piece. It's been discovered that William Tell and his son were members of a bowling league. Historians have not been able to find out the league sponsors, so I guess we'll never know for whom the Tells bowled. Enjoy. Thanks for listening to the Blue Leader Nation podcast. If this episode added value to you, please share it with another leader in your agency or your organization. And be sure to grab that reading list in the show notes. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep showing up for the people who are counting on you. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Blue Leader Nation podcast. Our passion is anyone within the thin blue line who want to take it to the next level. We hope you didn't mind the dad jokes, by the way. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at www.blueleadernation.com.